hosted by the KLRI, CGCMG, CSDLAP, and Korean Society of Climate Change Research, and organized by CGCMG. I am Master of Ceremony Kim Sung-ju, and thank you very much for being with us today. And before we begin our forum, I would like to kindly ask you to turn your mobile phones on vibrate mode or on silent mode. And today we are offering the translation service both in Korean and English. Please just tune into your channel, number 1 for Korean and 2 for English. And also for those who are on Zoom, please click on the interpretation function at the bottom of the screen. Then you can select of your language of your choice. 네, 본격적인 시작에 앞서 핸드폰은 진동 또는 무음으로 전환해 주시기 바랍니다. 본 행사에서는 한국어, 영어 동시 통역이 제공됩니다. 한국어를 들으시려면 1번으로 채널을 맞춰주시고 영어는 2번을 맞춰주시면 됩니다. 줌으로 접속하시는 분들 또한 화면 하단의 우측 쪽에 있는 통역 버튼을 클릭하신 후 원하시는 언어를 선택해 주시면 되겠습니다. From this forum, which is titled The Korea-U.S. Cooperation on Climate Change, invited best experts from home and abroad, and they are going to discuss cross cooperation and climate change. We're going to begin with the opening ceremony, followed by photo ops, forum introduction, presentation, and panel discussion. Without further ado, I would like to invite President Kye-Hong of KLRI for the opening speech. Please welcome him.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you. My name is Kim Kye-Hong, President of the Korea Legislation Research Institute. Welcome to our forum. And I'd like to also welcome many experts from home and abroad, and thank you for your participation. I'd like to also thank Sang-Hyup, the former ambassador to the U.S., Sang-Hyup, chairman of the Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth Commission, Dong-Q, Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, William Cobb, acting economic counselor of the U.S. Embassy Seoul, and Dong-Woon, president of Korean Society of Climate Change Research, for participating here out of your busy schedule. We are holding and planning the 4 rounds of Global Forum on Climate Change Law and Institutions. And the first forum, we talked about the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and NDC implementation. And second round, we talked about the ODA and Green ODA. And as a third forum, we are holding this forum on the theme of Korea-U.S. cooperation on climate change. Korea-U.S. cooperation should go beyond the security alliance, and we should cooperate with each other to collaborate in many fields, including the climate security. And the leaders of both countries declared a joint statement to continue our cooperation in a comprehensive manner. We are talking about the 2030 carbon neutrality target and the Paris Agreement Article 6, and we have affirmed our commitment to the Paris Agreement. And Korea and U.S. are leading the countries around the world in terms of climate change, and Korea is expected to contribute to achieving the greenhouse gas emissions target. And both countries are leading technologies in terms of the clean technologies and acceleration of the zero emission or low emission transportation. And both countries agreed to achieve the 2050 carbon neutrality and the significant emissions and the financial support for other countries around the world in relation to climate change. And we are expecting close cooperation in terms of technologies. Korea and the US are dealing with common challenges, and we are promoting comprehensive partnership in many fields. Both countries are also cooperating with many opportunities for clean technologies. I hope that this forum will serve as an opportunity to think about the ways for cooperation, and experts and the working level officials can talk about the issue. Specific agenda setting and the implementation methods, policy coordinations should be the areas of cooperation, and professionals and experts from both countries should contribute to this discussion. Scott Snyder, Senior Fellow of the Program on U.S.-Korea Policy, Allison, Senior Managing Associate of Sidley Austin, Washington, and Ted Curry, Director of the Energy Studies of Public Utility Research Center, for your presentations. I'd like to also thank the panels, Dong-Woon, Director of Division of Global Climate Change Technology Corporation, Kim Dave, Governance Lead, Global Green Growth Institute, and other panelists from Yulchon, and Research Fellow Lee Kyung-hee of Climate Change Legislation Team of KLRI. My special thanks to the organizers of this forum, including Professor Chung Suh-Yong. I hope that this forum will be an opportunity to share your ideas and communicate with each other. I hope that we can cooperate continuously in the areas of climate change laws and institutions. Once again, I'd like to thank all the participants for being here with us today. Thank you very much. President Kim Kye-Hong delivered the opening remarks. Thank you very much. And next, I'd like to invite the former U.S. Ambassador Sang-Hyup for his welcome address. President Kim recognized all the participants to be noted here today, so I'd like to skip that part. You recognize all the participants here, but he missed himself. I had an opportunity to meet with President Kim twice, and I think that every time he becomes mature. And in September last year, we had an international seminar on the same theme. We talked about Korea-U.S. cooperation on climate change. An international seminar on that theme was held in September last year. I was also the speaker of that forum. And at that time, I pointed out three things. You may not remember all the 3 points I mentioned, but today I want to make 3 points again. The first point is that for the past 1 year, international environment on climate change has changed. You may feel the changes. If you are interested in the climate change, you know the changes that has made for the past 1 year. It has been on a roller coaster. The direction of the roller coaster soared up very high, and I think we are facing that end. The soaring up high means the COP26. After the COP26 meeting, we had a meeting, and I saw hope after the meeting. When the Glasgow Compact was announced, I was very encouraged because Korea, US, and other countries presented an advanced NDC, and all the participants agreed on the phase out of the coal power generation, even though the timing of phase out may be different. And participants talked about the adaptation and support for developing countries in terms of budget and technology. There was a elevated consensus on the support for developing countries, and parties agreed on the budget support. So that was the results of the COP26, and I thought that Paris Agreement was a skeleton, and the flesh has become added to the skeleton with the meeting of COP26. When the meeting was held, I was in Washington, and the president back then was Mr. President Obama. And when I saw COP26 last year, I thought that it was quite like John Kerry and President Biden's work. So they started off very well, and roller coaster soared up very high. But we are at the bottom due to the Ukraine war. With the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, the Western countries put embargo on Russia. But Russia stopped the supply of gas and oil to European countries. So European countries are facing very difficult situations. So European countries want to start the coal-powered generation. It was very shocking news for people in the climate change, because European countries had high interest and high technology in terms of climate change and greenhouse gases, but they wanted to start the coal power generation. So that's why I think that we are at the bottom of the roller coaster. You may feel the changes, and I want to point that situation one more time. And we are at the bottom, I said, but at the bottom we need to have a solution, and we need to have a measure to respond to the situation. I think the one method we can do is the coalition of the willing. Coalition of the willing requires architecture that enables the coalition. And how to make an architecture? I think we need to be at the center of the circle. At the center, we have the US, which enabled the Paris Agreement and the Glasgow Pact. US should be at the center of the circle, but US alone cannot solve the problem. US and the allies should be at the center, and at the next level, we need to have countries which are not allies of the US, but which share the values like democracy, human rights, and liberty. So next level should be like-minded countries. And at the next level, we should have countries, even though they do not share the values like democracy or market economy. As William Cobb, acting economic counselor, pointed out, it is a challenge of art time. I am fully agreeing with his comment. At the center, there should be US and the allies, and at the next level, there should be like-minded countries. And outside, there should be countries which think that climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. I think there will be many countries who feel the same way. So those countries should join this architecture. But this architecture is not is existing already. We did not conceptualize the concept, but we have the concept of coalition of the willing, and there is a big picture of this architecture. We already implemented this architecture. President Biden visited the Korea in May this year, and in the joint statement, climate change was at the center of the agenda. And the statement talked about bio, batteries, semiconductors, and electric vehicles, and cyber and space technologies. These are not independent and separate things. Cooperation in those fields to help tackle the climate change issues. So that joint declaration is an important agreement that contributes to the tackling of climate change issues. If we want to architecture to be implemented well, there should be NATO, and in the APEC region we have Korea, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia, and they should go together with hand in hand. And I'm feeling that the country's cooperation is getting stronger and stronger. At the G7 meeting held in the UK, Korea was invited, and Japan was a member, and Australia and New Zealand, India were invited to the G7 meeting. That means that countries think the importance of gathering all the allies and like-minded countries. And at the NATO meeting, Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand were invited. I think that the kind of architecture I mentioned is working at this moment. And ITEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, is also having 4 pillars, and the third pillar is climate change pillar, with the participation of the U.S. allies and like-minded countries, like 13 or 14 like-minded countries. So this architecture, coalition of the willing, is not just a void thing, and this architecture is already in operation. Climate change should not be neglected at this moment. European countries want to start at the coal power generation due to the Ukraine-Russian war. But to solve this situation, we need to draw a big picture, and we need to move forward based on this architecture. My third point is that when I point out the previous 2 things, people may think that it is absurd, because crisis may be turned into opportunities. European countries are at the center of the climate change in terms of its interest, budget, and technology. And at the center of the climate change issues, the European countries face the disruption of gas supply from Russia. So this winter will be a harsh time for European countries. But if they overcome this winter, they can turn the crisis into opportunities. When we visit the European countries and see, we may feel how advanced they are. When the gas and oil prices are cheap, countries tend to slow down their efforts to make an innovation. But due to the Ukraine-Russian war, with the shortage of gas and oil supply from Russia, they need to come up with a long-term solution. Even though in the short term they think about the coal power generation, but they need to have a long-term solution. President No Dong-Woon pointed out the long-term solution as well. What I want to say today is that the third point may not be acceptable to you, but I like to take the risk to talk about the third thing. But before I mention the point, President No Dong-woon already pointed out that part. So I think that we can turn the crisis into opportunity. I'd like to summarize the 3 points I mentioned today. The first point is that things have changed regarding the climate change for the past year. And second, we have coalition of the willing should be established properly to face the challenges. And the third one is to find a way to turn the crisis into opportunities. Next year, we will have the forum, maybe, Mr. Chung, maybe hold the forum on climate change based on COP27, and I hope that positive talks will be held next time. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your welcome speech. And next, we have 4 speakers for delivering the congratulatory remarks. First, Chairman Kim Sang-Hyup of Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth Commissions will deliver his congratulatory remarks, and he will be joining us with.
Hello, everyone. I am Kim Sang-Hyup, Chairman of the Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth Commission. Today, I think it is all the meaningful to congratulate on the opening of the Global Seminar on the Cooperation and Climate Change. I wish I could be with you now, but as I'm about to participate in a ceremony to declare Chungcheongnam-do as carbon neutral economic specialized province. His Excellency former Ambassador Sang-Hyup to U.S. and also he said that he will just skip recognizing other people because the former speaker has mentioned, but I would not. So I would like to first recognize Professor Suh-Yong of Korea University, and also I would like to also thank His Excellency former Korean Ambassador to U.S., Mr. Kye-Hong, for insightful speech, and also I'd like to thank President Kye-Hong of KLRI, as well as my thanks goes to President Dong-Woon of Korean Society of Climate Change Research. Also, Director General Lee Dong-Kyu of MOFA and Mr. William Cobb, Acting Economic Counselor of the U.S. Embassy, and Senior Fellow Scott Snyder, and also presenters from home and abroad, participants home and abroad. Thank you all for being here today. A few days ago, I met His Excellency Mr. Philip Goldberg, U.S. Ambassador to Korea, and honestly, we have discussed on the current issues between the two countries and direction for the cooperation. We reminded ourselves that particularly that last May, the two countries' leaders, through Global Conference of Strategic Partnership, has expanded alliance between the two countries further, and we agreed that carbon neutrality and green growth, as well as climate change and also energy, will become a high agenda or important agenda. Particularly, the IRA Act passed from both Senate and House, has a good objective of building infrastructure and creating industrial ecosystem. But despite the good purpose, it has a potential adverse impact on Korean companies, the strategic partner and ally of the U.S. So I conveyed this honestly, our concern to him. And Ambassador is fully understanding that. And also, he said that he would do his best to address the issue. And as you know, President Biden of the U.S. sent a letter to President Yoon saying that he will consult with Korean government with open mind on the IRA, and also repeatedly emphasized that he would make best efforts to strengthen the Korea-U.S. alliance and achievement of the shared goal. And following a two-state meeting in Seoul and London and New York, they have reaffirmed that they are on the same boat and showed clearly that the two countries' relations is extraordinarily resilient. Distinguished guests, as you know, climate change is existential threat for all humanity and its survival. So it is called a global challenge of our time or global commons. Not only at the level of the alliance between the two countries, but at the level of global strategic partners, they should cooperate to working on and tackling on the climate change. In the areas of EV battery, renewables, next generational nuclear power plant, low power semiconductor and carbon reduction technology, waste treatment, circular economy, food and health, the two countries should create together sustainable supply chain and industrial ecosystem based on the solid trust than any other time. Made in Korea, made in America, likewise, made with friends, made together is important, and we have to work together on this as well. In his speech at the UN General Assembly in September, President Yoon said that Korea would expand ODA and support developing countries for low carbon transitions and develop actively the green technology to share with humanity. Presidential Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth Commission is committed to making them concrete by holding meetings related ministries. In order to realize the shared goal of carbon neutrality of the world, we are committed to or seeking the appropriate role sharing with the United States. At the COP26 held in Glasgow last time, President Biden also proposed the spread of the green technology globally, and we are paying attention to the First Movers Coalition as well. And in 2012, we have set up the GGI to support the low carbon transition of developing countries with all like-minded countries, and the membership is exceeding that of the EU. And I hope that the U.S. will lead a multilateral eco partnership to share this joint goal by acceding to GGI. And I hope this seminar is very meaningful in that way that we can also have a very fruitful outcome for the future generations, not only for the two countries. Thank you. Next, I would like to invite Director General Lee Dong-Gu of MOFA for the congratulatory remarks. Please welcome him. As Ambassador An Ho-young has raised an issue and questioned whether we should recognize repeatedly, but anyway, I would go with the recognition. Chairman Kim Sang-Hyup of Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth Commission, and His Excellency An Ho-young, the former Korean ambassador to the U.S., President Kim Kye-Hong of KLRI, and President Dong-Woon of Korean Society for Climate Change Research, and also Professor Chung Suh-Yong and other members. Thank you all for being here. And last but not least, William Cobb, counselor of the U.S. Embassy to Korea. In particular, when it comes to the former ambassador, Mr. An Ho-young, is my role model, and I am trying to somewhat emulate him, and so it makes me nervous to stay in front of him and making speeches. While I was listening to his speech, well, I felt that the ideals is ideal and the reality is reality. So I have to work out more to emulate him. And ladies and gentlemen, and panelists and presenters, I'm very glad to see you, everyone. First of all, under the topic of the Korea's climate change cooperation, we are participating in the third global forum on climate change law institutions, and congratulations on you on that. In September 24th, in order to raise the alert and sense of awareness of the climate crisis, young children and students took to the street in Gwanghwamun. Compared to other protests and other movement, the size was not that large, but in terms of the climate movement, it was the largest ever. As you have experienced before, we had unprecedented torrential rains and typhoons causing a lot of damages, and many citizens are now feeling and getting the sense of awareness on the climate change and its disasters. So I think it is very meaningful that we have this forum to discuss on the cooperations and response to climate change with the United States, which is the leader in this field and also our closest ally. And the world has suffered the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic, and we had a severe crisis globally, but none of these had led our momentum to be lost, and we have created an outcome of the Glasgow Climate Pact. Now we need to have a wisdom and commitment to carry out bolstering the climate action at this time. And this forum, I believe, that will come out with suggestions how to implement the climate response.
President Yoon of Korea and President Biden of the United States reconfirmed their commitments to their announced nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement last May. The United States is ranked as the second largest emitter, and Korea is ranked around at the 10th. What a shame. So the two countries have a lot to share their mitigation potentials and technologies that both countries need to find in many sectors of their economies. For example, both countries have not only advanced manufacturing industries, including IT and automobile industries, which for sure climate and the global and the global methane pledge. Recently, Korea engaged in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. As already the ambassador mentioned, the IPEF, led by the US, and in particular, Korea played an active role in Pillar 3 of the IPEF, which covers mainly the clean economy and energy issues. Having said many cooperation issues already addressed between the two countries, I believe the discussion at today's forum will spur bilateral activities which will contribute to the achieving the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal of the Paris Agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, I have every confidence that our two countries will build even stronger relations in the field of climate change cooperation. I believe this forum will lead to a rich and productive discussion among experts of both countries and show future directions for even more vigorous climate cooperation between two countries. I thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lee.
Next, William Cobb, Acting Economic Council, will deliver his congratulatory remarks.
Thank you so much, President Kim or Chairman Kim. So many distinguished guests. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here talking about something that is so important to all of us. But let me just go ahead and say, when Ambassador Ong came up here, I couldn't help but be touched because back in 2015, I was finishing work with Secretary Kerry's team, and we had come back from just a huge win with the Paris Climate Agreement. And as I transitioned off of his team, I transitioned to our Korea desk back at State Department headquarters in Washington. And who was, of course, our main counterpart, but Ambassador An. And what he was able to demonstrate for me as someone that was new to working on Korea issues was not only that the relationship was strong, but he was able to demonstrate and kind of be that example of what we were able to achieve by working together. He's kind of that living example of the potential that we have in not only working together, but then drawing more people in, more countries in, such that together that, the alliance of the willing becomes stronger and stronger, and we're able to just demonstrate what together we're able to achieve. And that's really what we're going to have to do to address this challenge, the challenge of our time, climate change. The United States, hopefully I think from recent legislation, has demonstrated it remains committed to collaborating not only with the Republic of Korea, but with this coalition of the willing to fight the urgent climate crisis facing the world. A crisis that's been long in the making, a crisis that now requires us to act, not only as independent countries in doing what we can independently, but more importantly, by working together. So addressing the climate change is a top priority of President Biden. More importantly, it's an important crisis that we need to address as individuals and citizens in the United States and around the world. And it's very clear that the Korean people are stepping up, as evidenced by President Yoon's actions and the actions of the Korean people. We remain committed to collaborating with the Republic of Korea to fight the climate crisis, and we are looking forward to accelerating action not only domestically but internationally. It wasn't long ago when the United States was applauding the ROK's, or Korea's nationally determined contribution commitment made at COP26, and its decision to join the global methane pledge, a call to action to eliminate by year 2030 more than 0.2 degrees centigrade of near-term warming through reducing global methane by at least 30%. Where are we now? As Ambassador An referred, things have changed. Climate change remains not only a serious global challenge, but the challenge of our time, and one we can only successfully address through close cooperation with all of our partners. We share an urgent need to increase investments in clean energy technologies to seriously combat the climate crisis. And meeting our climate change obligations is the primary objective of the United States Inflation Reduction Act. So I'm very pleased to report the United States is stepping up, and fortunately, our efforts are being amplified by you. The United States and the Republic of Korea, as part of, as Ambassador An referred to it, the Coalition of the Willing, together have agreed to set examples among world leaders in reducing carbon emissions, conserving and enhancing natural carbon sinks, and expanding collaboration on technology and innovation to meet our climate goals. Addressing the threats of climate change is the challenge of our time. It requires much more cooperation on all levels, internationally between governments, domestically across ministries, in partnership with the private sector, and engaging all of society. Only then can we turn today's crisis into opportunity. To this end, U.S. and ROK experts must continue engaging in technical exchanges and expanding our efforts to achieve our 2030 targets and our 2050 goals. I know the ROK is moving forward on initiatives to promote clean energy. As a major oil and gas importer, Korea can spur action in this sector by increasing its demand for lower methane fuel energy imports. We welcome Korea's efforts to enhance its technical assistance and financing for methane mitigation domestically and overseas. We also appreciate the leadership of Korean private sector leaders setting net zero targets and making investments in clean energy, technology at home and abroad. The Republic of Korea and the United States are steadfast partners. We have been for a long time, and I know that partnership is going to continue to grow. Together, we are the foundation of, as Ambassador An said, the Coalition of the Willing. This event showcases our ongoing collaboration and should facilitate new opportunities that will advance diverse climate change thinking and solutions. Thank you. I look forward to us continuing to address this challenge together. Thank you.
Thank you for your congratulatory remarks. And next, I'd like to invite President Dong-Woon of the Korea Society of Climate Change Research. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
반갑습니다.
Thank you for your kind
오늘
introduction.
기별 학회하고 같이 이렇게 행사를 하게 돼서
I'm very delighted to be here at this important forum. The world is facing the carbon neutrality era, and G20 countries declared carbon neutrality, and except for Poland, OECD countries declared carbon neutrality.
석탄에 의존하고 있는 중국 전혀
China,
탄소 중립하고는
dependent
상관없다는
on carbon, already
그리고
declared carbon
이 기별학회
neutrality.
무대에서 자꾸 마른 수건이라고 더 이상 감축할 수 있는 여지가 없다고 하는 그 일본도 탄소
Japan
중립을 선언했습니다.
also
우리나라도 물론
declared
마찬가지고.
the carbon
우리나라는
neutrality as
14번째로
well as
탄소
Korea.
중립법을
Korea
제정한 상당히
has become the
선도국가로 가
14th
있는
country which
국가로 볼 수
enacted
있습니다.
the Carbon Neutrality Act.
근데 국가뿐만
So
아니고요.
Korea is
이
leading the
유사한
global
기업들이
efforts, I
탄소
can
중립을 다
say.
선언했습니다. 그래서 이제
And many
기업들이
countries around the world
ESG라는
and many
걸 통해서
companies around the world declared
탄소
carbon
중립을
neutrality,
달성하지 않으면
and they
기업이
incorporate
생존할
carbon
수
neutrality
없는
into their
시대가
management.
있어서 탄소
So
중립에
without
선택이
carbon
아니라
neutrality, we can not proceed. So carbon neutrality has become a must, not an option. And according to the IPCC report, we need to cut the emissions by 50%. And to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius target, about 510 CO2 tons are required to be cut. And the budget will not be enough. And by 2050, it will be minus 200 CO tons. it means that we will face the carbon negative emissions. The carbon neutrality strategy is zero carbon, electrification, and for the areas where electrification is hard to achieve, energy consumption can be lowered, and that kind of method is required to achieve our target. Solar power, wind power can contribute to reduction of carbon emissions. Biohydrogen technology should be developed to achieve 2050 carbon neutrality target. According to the recent analysis, to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius target, 3 gigatons will be reduced, but further reduction need to be required. It means that it is very challenging for us to achieve the target. So what is important for Korea and the US is technological cooperation. Technology is available in the market, but policy and the willingness in the political sector is required to utilize the technologies. Technology development is also required, and Korea and the US need to cooperate on many fields like electrification technologies and carbon reduction technologies. And EV is contributing a lot to the CO2 emissions reduction. Batteries, minerals related to batteries require the bilateral cooperations, and we also need to discuss the ways to implement the Paris Agreement, Article 6, between the two countries. And the chairman at the meeting said that the man of man was Mr. An. And I also recognize Kim Sang-Hyup, chairman, William Cobb, acting economic counselor, and all the experts from Human Abroad. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much. And next, we will have photo sessions together. So I'd like to ask all the participants to come up to the podium for photo session. After the photo session, we will have presentation sessions. Thank you very much. And please come up to the podium, being guided by our staff. Next, we will start the second session. I'd like to ask all the participants to be seated. Next, I'd like to invite Professor Suh-Yong for his presentation on introduction of the forum, its objectives and opportunities. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Most audience here are Korean, so let me just speak in Korean. 예, 소개를 받은 고려대학교 정소영입니다.
Thank you for your kind introduction. My name is Chung Suh-Yong, from the professor of Korea University.
국내외 전문가들께서 참석해 주셔서 대단히 감사합니다.
Thank you for your
앞에서
participation.
개회식에서 제가
And
앉아서
in the opening
들었지만
ceremony, I
오늘
felt
개회식이
that
거의 뭐
the
굉장히
opening
뜨거운
session is kind of a discussion session because many information was exchanged and delivered. And each and every speakers and are the expert, and each and every words from them have significance. And I think the intention of the talk is that climate change is a very hard problem to solve, and we need to solve it. And not only one country cannot solve this problem. So partners are required to solve the problem. And if all countries cannot participate, the starting point should be the gathering of the countries with leadership. I think in this regard, the Korea-US cooperation is very important in the multilateral efforts. And these are the points made by all the speakers in the opening session. And the intention of organizing this seminar is in the consistency with the remarks made by the speakers in the opening session. We have many participants here at the forum and the online participants, and they will think about the discussion topics based on our discussion today. First, when we talk about climate change issue, it has many pillars. So we have the joint declaration, joint statement between Korea and the US, and the coalition. The word coalition is mentioned in many parts of the joint statement. And when we talk about climate change, we should not think about the word itself. We should think about all relevant topics, and we need to think about many different things under the umbrella of climate change. It can be divided into detailed level, but I like to divide the themes into 4 major pillars. When we talk about the climate change, we need to think about the emission reduction target. Without the emission reduction target discussion, it is meaningless to talk about climate change because it creates many opportunities to discuss the issue. Emission reduction target is very important, but it is not all of the climate change issue. As many speakers pointed out already, the driving force behind the climate change is technology. Technology should be studied and developed, and that technology is related to carbon storage and carbon capture technologies. It should not be stopped short of research. It should be commercialized, and without money, without finance, technologies cannot be disseminated. And this fund for commercialization of the technology can be made from the private sector and the public sector. At the global level, most of the countries are working hard to reduce the greenhouse emissions, but they should not focus just on domestic issues. They should look at the bigger picture at the global level. we need to think about how to harmonize all those 4 pillars under the climate change when we discuss climate change issues. When we talk about Korea-US cooperation, we need to think about the starting point. What should be the starting point? The most important thing is the joint statement made by the 2 presidents on climate change. The joint statement by the 2 presidents was very significant. It was not the first joint statement, and you may be surprised when you look at the past joint statement made by presidents of Korea and the US. And these 4 are related to the climate change in the joint statement. So please refer to the words mentioned in the joint statement. The first one is the cooperation on energy security and technological cooperation. Energy security and technology are the areas of cooperation. When U.S. talk about the climate change, they take an approach in terms of energy security and technology. So to understand the U.S.'s climate change policies, we need to understand the relevant keywords like market, energy, and technology. So we need to find a common ground between the Korea and the U.S. In NDC implementation, 2030 target and 2050 net zero emission goals were mentioned in the joint statement, but it is not all about the climate change. It is just one element of climate change. And the third one is that the U.S. emphasizes this a lot. When Korea talks about climate change, we may think about carbon dioxide, but methane is also important emission source, and the United States is working hard to reduce the methane emissions reduction. So we need to think and take the methane emission seriously, and methane emissions from the livestock area, agriculture area, and waste area. And these methane emissions should be reduced. And hydrogen is the key word. It is not the current technology, it is the technology of the future, but we can find a solution for the climate change issues in the future with the hydrogen. So with the hydrogen technology, the 2 countries will lead the efforts of climate change. And transportation is one of the focus areas of the U.S. So to reduce the NDC, transportation sector is very important for the U.S. EVs, batteries, and onshore transportation is very important areas to respond to climate change in the U.S. Transportation includes shipping, which means green shipping. Aviation is also important sector as part of transportation. And next, there is a regional discussion. Cooperation in the ASEAN and the Indo-Pacific region is also mentioned in the joint statement, what we should do in the regional level. And there is an agreement between Korea and the U.S. regarding this point. But without any actions after making the joint statement, it is meaningless. So today we want to talk about the current issues to implement the things that is mentioned in the joint statement. In this regard, institutional foundation need to be established to specify our cooperation. The institutional foundation is important in this regard, and as President Roh Dong-Woon pointed out, I think the comprehensive climate change agreement is required to elevate the efforts to respond to climate change in a systematic way. This kind of talks can be made at the Korean government level, but that may not be discussed in the U.S. government level. So this may be the potential cooperation area. And at the global level, the Korea and the U.S. Can work together with many organizations like UNFCCC, G20, GGGI, GCF, Major Economies Forum, FMC, and First Movers Coalition, as mentioned by Kim Sang-Hyup, chairman of the Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth Commissions. And at the regional level, we can cooperate and utilize many frameworks like Quad, ASEAN, and North Korea, which is essential for Korea's response to climate change. So we can discuss the climate change issues with regard to North Korea. For example, we are working hard to export the nuclear power plants to the Middle East, so we can cooperate with the U.S. In terms of the exporting of our nuclear technology to the Middle East. Without laying the institutional foundation, we cannot proceed further. But with the institutional foundation with no content, it is also meaningless. So I'd like to propose a list of subjects we can discuss today. The first topic is transportation, and today one of the topics of the presentation is the Inflation Reduction Act, and there will be some comments related to the act, and energy can be a key topic for discussion. And Korea is highly interested in nuclear technology, and hydrogen is also important technology. And all of these topics can be discussed, and there are some worrisome uses about the coal power generation. In the short term, we can use the coal power generation, but it should not lead to the increase in CO2 emissions. So to reduce that kind of CO2 emissions, we can utilize the CCS technology to keep the carbon emissions level low. And to achieve the NDC of Korea, we are talking about the CCS-US technologies. So we need to think about the ways to utilize the technology. We can use the shale gas from the US to use the LNG for power generation source. And I talked about the methane already. And at the international cooperation level, forest and land use area have a lot of potential. When you see the situation in the US, there are wildfire in the San Francisco and many other wildfire issues. Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asian countries together with us can find a solution to deal with the greenhouse gas issues and climate change issues in the forest and land use area. And development finance, including ODA, is also important. In addition to that, private sector's investment should be considered. And Korea is investing a lot in the battery sector in the US. It is led not by the government but by the private sector. But we need to discuss further about the promotion of that kind of investment. It is not the summary of the talks today. It is just a topic and the source of discussion for today. And I think that we can find solutions for each areas of these topics. That's all for my presentation. Thank you very much. Professor Chung, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Next.
I would like to invite the senior fellow, Scott Snyder, and he's going to deliver his message via audio.
Good morning to everyone. I want to offer my thanks to the hosts and organizers of today's seminar discussing the status of and prospects for Korea-US cooperation on climate change. I especially want to acknowledge the leadership of Professor Chung Suh-Yong of Korea University, who has been an innovative thought leader and ideas entrepreneur in this area for many years. It's no surprise that climate change has emerged as a priority area for US-South Korea cooperation under the Biden administration, which has recommitted itself strongly to US leadership on this issue by rejoining the Paris Agreement and mobilizing international commitment to the global goal of limiting the average temperature increase above pre-industrial levels to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Toward that end, the Biden administration aims to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 50% from 2005 levels by 2030 as a step toward achieving net zero emissions economy-wide by 2050, and has recently passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides a legislative framework toward those goals. The Biden administration has exhorted other countries, including South Korea, to make similar contributions toward global greenhouse gas emissions reductions. The shared task of achieving these reductions has become a significant objective as part of the US-South Korea alliance. Now, we all know that we live in a world of competing priorities and that the alliance is no exception. The main focus of the alliance is to ensure South Korea's security against external threats from North Korea. But since 2009, the scope of the alliance has expanded to encompass cooperation in many fields beyond the Korean Peninsula under successive joint vision statements, and climate change is a shared existential threat. Yet the issue of climate change competes as a priority with both the alliance's original focus on North Korea and with the impact of rising US-China rivalry, as well as supply chain resiliency objectives that represent another growth area in terms of institutionalized cooperation between our two countries. The importance of climate change to the Biden administration has been signaled within the alliance through pledges and joint statements with both the Moon and Yoon administrations. The evolution of alliance aspirations to contribute to international security and the Yoon administration's own pledges to become a global pivotal state have expanded expectations for how the United States and South Korea can work together on a shared climate change agenda. Moreover, the Yoon-Biden joint statement from last May authorized the deepening of institutionalized coordination between the US and South Korea, not only to meet broad policy goals, but also to jointly develop clean energy technologies such as hydrogen, clean shipping, zero emissions vehicle production, as well as US and South Korean government cooperation to build new nuclear plants internationally, as well as shared approaches to climate financing. With this joint mandate, the main questions are how to create new institutional frameworks that incentivize and facilitate US-South Korean cooperation in technology and market development, and how best to implement these areas of cooperation. We know from experience that such efforts will not be easy, but they will be exciting because they involve working together to create new forms of cooperation toward a shared set of goals. In practical terms, to achieve both the shared vision and the envisioned level of specialized coordination between the two governments and their private sectors, I would suggest the following functions must be successfully developed or integrated into existing bureaucratic coordination mechanisms as part of the US-South Korea alliance. First, I recommend the establishment of a joint US-South Korea Climate Change Council as a component of coordination between the US and South Korean National Security Councils that is tasked to ensure whole of alliance coordination on climate change policies and the establishment of new frameworks for promoting cooperation in specific domains of clean energy technology development. The US-South Korea Climate Change Council would serve as the alliance's control tower for managing climate change coordination to assist both countries in achieving their respective climate change goals. Secondly, I recommend the establishment of coordination on the development of new clean energy technologies through research and development block grant programs between the Department of Energy's Advanced Research Project Agency Energy, known as ARPA-E. It is an agency that funds game-changing energy technologies too early for private sector investment. This agency should work with an appropriate agency within South Korea's Ministry of Trade, Energy, and Industry for the purpose of promoting clean energy technologies. Development of such a program would provide American and South Korean researchers opportunities to join talents and engage in cutting-edge R&D to develop next-generation energy efficiency technologies. Thirdly, I recommend the facilitation of U.S.-South Korea private sector cooperation to identify climate change-related opportunities. This work might be supported by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Korean International Trade Association or another Korean counterpart. And finally, I recommend the elevation of a best practices dialogue on climate financing as a component of international development cooperation between the U.S. Agency of International Development and the Korean Overseas International Cooperation Agency. As the U.S.-South Korea joint coordination on climate change evolves, other coordination needs and opportunities may emerge between the two nations. For now, the Biden-Yoon joint statement identifies a range of shared objectives that require deepened institutional coordination to achieve. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this conference, and thank you for your attention and consideration of my recommendations.
Well, that was Mr. Snyder, and thank you for your speech. Next.
Allison, the Senior Managing Associate, CSDLAP Austin, will make a presentation on the Inflation Reduction Act. Good morning, everyone. I'm Allison, Senior Managing Associate of CSDLAP Austin, Washington. Thank you for inviting me to this important forum. And I'd like to also thank the Korea Legislation Research Institute, and I'd like to make a presentation in English. And please contact me freely if you have any questions.
My name is Allison In. I am a Senior Managing Associate in our Washington, D.C. office. I'm sorry, there is some technical issues with the interpretation. So I'm a Senior Managing Associate in the Washington, D.C. office of CSDLAP Austin. My practice focuses on environmental and safety, primarily impacting energy, manufacturing, and automotive sectors. I really appreciate the invitation from the Korea Legislation Research Institute, among the other hosts, to speak at this important forum about the Inflation Reduction Act. I hope that you are not hearing the interpretation at the same time, since I'm hearing from my Zoom. Could you maybe just to confirm that you are not hearing? No, I'm hearing from my Zoom video, the interpretation voices coming from my computer, even if I turn it off. Okay, let me try this way. I'm still hearing, but let me try to. Let me try to maybe just ignore. So I believe this presentation and the invitation was very timely. Sorry, still here. We recently co-hosted several webinars on the Inflation Reduction Act, given the significant interest from various stakeholders, including the one we hosted with a professional staff member for Senator Joe Manchin, the chairman of the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, who apparently played a key role in passing this important bill. It is clear from our attendees in Korea that there is huge interest in the Inflation Reduction Act and understanding what it says and what it means, particularly for Korea. And we only have 20 minutes here today, so I'm going to do my best to help you with its meaning and implications focusing on environmental and energy. Recently have published a number of client alerts already on the legislation and anticipate publishing additional, more focused alerts such as sustainable fuels, offshore leasing, and electric vehicles. We may also have additional webinars, so if you're interested in hearing more about the IRA, please feel free to reach out and let me know. What I hope I could cover today is two parts. The first one is the overview of the act, including how we got here and a little bit of behind the scenes views. The second part is our view on what the highlights of the legislation are, particularly from environmental aspects, RLA, the Titles B and 6. For a quick overview of the RLA, I start by reminding audience what the IRA is and what this is not. So it is a budget reconciliation bill, which is a type of legislation that allows for tax, spending, and debt limit changes. So it is not new authorizing legislation, really just modifying government outlays and revenues. Here, what's at stake? Okay. Sorry, I was getting a tip from the host that I might be able to just turn off my speaker. Could you confirm maybe via the message that you can still hear me? Okay, I got it confirmed. So let me continue on. Thank you for the assistance and sorry about the technical glitches. And thank you, Ted, for your help too and suggestion. So where was I? So basically what I was clarifying, it is not new authorizing legislation, really just modifying government outlays and the revenues. So here's what's at stake, and that is, voila, 750 billion with nearly 370 billion towards the clean energy and climate-related measures. And that should be the focus of today. And only, you can imagine, 22 budget reconciliation bills have been enacted thus far, meaning that it's rare and it's big. And as I think many have become familiar with the arcane rules of the Senate just because of the recent uprising in the Senate bills, and then the Korean people here hearing about in the news outlets. But the unique feature of the reconciliation bills is that it allows for expedited procedures in the Senate, requiring just a simple majority vote. Even with the expedited procedures, the bill's passage was not quick. It first took the form of the Build Back Better Act, known as BBP, introduced in the House last September, and passed in mid-November. but it got stalled in the Senate and has been renegotiated on and off since last year. And voila, what we have in final is that the act containing 728 pages, I could be wrong by a margin of maybe a couple pages, dealing with a combination of tax, healthcare, and climate issues. At a high level, IRA provisions break down into 4 types that you are seeing on this slide. That has direct impacts to our clients or the stakeholders: taxes, tax credits, new funding streams, fees, and liabilities. Today, we will focus on the climate-related sections. So what's to note before we go on is that there will be also indirect impacts to various stakeholders from agencies' implementation of the provisions, and that is something we are staying tuned for, as in reality, it could have even more direct impacts to those stakeholders. Can you go to next slide? And you will see on this slide here, I've provided a top 10 list of provisions from the energy and environmental titles of the Act. These are covered in a client alert we recently released, but immediately after the passage of the Act, I encourage the audience to check out that alert, which includes a helpful section by section summary. So in the interest of time, since we now only have the 20 minutes, but I think I'm allowed to spend a little more time, I'll briefly cover first the 5 listed here from the environmental title. Please note that again, the final act is very extensive in scope and coverage. So here are only the energy and environmental highlights that do not involve tax credits. And that's a whole another discussion that I can just go on and on. So here, the first one on the item is the methane emissions will be now subject to a new fee, but beginning in 2024 and up to $1,500 per ton, and that is by 2027. And as Professor Chung, during his presentation, rightly pointed out, this is a fee on methane, not on CO2, showing how seriously the US is considering now the methane emissions, among greenhouse gases. And among the revenue generating provisions of the IRA, the Congress established a new fee on methane emissions from the oil and natural gas sector. So it's not that comprehensive. But beginning in 2025 and each year thereafter, facilities with 9 segments of the sector that emit more than 25,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent of greenhouse gases annually will be subject to an annual fee on methane emissions exceeding prescribed thresholds. And there are a bunch of formulas and the calculations out there to simply just to estimate the thresholds and everything. But again, here in the interest of the time, let me just move on to the next, which is another big topic here. And the next one is the carbon capture projects, and it's now eligible for billions more federal funding. So that is, again, separate from the tax credits. The energy and environmental titles of the bill provide for hundreds of billions in funding opportunities for CCS projects. And that is ranging from hefty loan commitments by the Department of Energy to grants through, again, the Department of Energy's new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. And that was just established by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. The third is the increased funding to boost, voila, low and zero emission vehicles. Aside, again, from the tax credits for EVs, which is getting a lot of attention, I'm aware, maybe particularly for Korean audience, as I've seen in numerous media coverage, and tax credits for advanced manufacturing of EV battery materials, there is a significant amount of direct spending authority through grants at DOE here and EPA to boost EVs, including nearly $1 billion for grants and rebates for heavy-duty vehicles and infrastructure. And one to note that is very fresh and timely is that EPA, as of today in the US time, announced a streamlined review for chemical registration review, known as PMN, or the pre-manufacturing notices for EV battery chemicals. I wouldn't say it was, but by coincidence, we've been representing one of the largest EV battery manufacturers for their chemical registration with EPA. So was able to glean in advance that this was coming. So we are very happy about this announcement, but we'll see more and better in the near future about how EPA, the agency is especially having an issue of constrained resources and budgets, will apply this streamlined process for EV battery chemicals. The next one is number 4. The funding is now made available to improve the environmental permitting reviews. The environmental permitting delays have long been an issue for energy projects, particularly. And here, what's at issue has been the renewable projects. As an environmental practitioner of almost 10 years in the US, I personally witnessed many challenges the industry clients have gone through due to these delays. So the IRA provides significant funding for EPA, DOE, FERC, and DOI, as well as the CEO to hire and train staff to facilitate the timely and efficient reviews. And for here, we are looking at about $450 million across these agencies, and that's alone. Number 5 is the funds now to the EPA oversight of the corporate climate goals. And that is the last I note, but this is a novel funding to support the EPA standards and the oversight for corporate the greenhouse gas goals, and a new program for product declarations. There is much more to say about this provision and where EPA may be headed, particularly in light of the SEC's the climate disclosure proposal that's heavily still in progress and debated. Now, turning to the energy-related parts. And slightly before that, as you could see, for the first 5 related to the environmental, they are mostly going to increase funding to related agencies, which will in turn likely result in more actions from the agencies and their implementation of the act to come. On the other hand, the energy side is more direct funding to specific projects, in turn making this funding to be more domestic. So that maybe is possibly less interested by the audience outside of the US. So having said that, I'm going to just quickly go through the remaining items. So the first one on the energy-related provisions, nearly $3 billion in federal funds is now made available to advance electric transmission, citing onshore and offshore. The next one is another additional funding and statutory amendments to facilitate the offshore wind development. And I've been personally involved in litigating, also getting permits for the one of the largest offshore wind development. And I am particularly excited that, you know, this will really go on and make the true impacts in the US. And then the third one is basically just amendments to the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act and then the Mineral Leasing Act. And that is to increase the rates and the fees for fossil fuel development and ultimately to eliminate the non-competitive. And the next one is to fund to promote more energy efficient buildings. Again, it's quite domestic. And then the 5th one is the new investment in nuclear energy. Now, it's not really discussed here, but very much briefly on the environmental justice front, which is another kind of a new wing out of the EPA. But the EPA Administrator Reagan is personally kind of committed his time to really kind of get it done and executed. So I personally have read a lot of trade press on how the EJ or the environmental justice community is a bit disappointed with this bill compared to the original Build Back Better Act. But now yet the bill actually adopts the Biden administration's Justice 40 initiative that is carving out almost 40% of the $27 billion on the greenhouse reduction fund. So that is also to come, particularly for the Korean industry or the companies who have a basis in particularly the rural or maybe disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. And this is a special note that I just wanted to provide to essentially revisit the definition of greenhouse gases. Not so newly provided in the bill, but refreshing if you take a look at the legislative history on greenhouse gases definition. This definition will be largely covering the grants and the funding programs which we just went over. This is nothing particularly limited in scope, but what we are about to see is how this pans out in terms of supporting past and upcoming landmark Supreme Court decisions such as the Massachusetts versus EPA. But at this point, what I can say to you is that we just assume that applicability is arguably limited to the specific sections in the IRA. Can you go to next slide? So this slide is simply just a listing of few more funding opportunities. Again, we can simply just go on and on by listing out, all the funding opportunities and in turn investment opportunities. But this is to simply showcase, how many are out there. And can you go to the last slide? This is the last slide, and sorry, Nick, a little before. Yes. So this is for us, particularly from the private practice perspective, which may be the areas, potential areas of support we may provide in the ongoing or the upcoming month for our clients. As you can see, this is a pretty broad and comprehensive, and we might be just estimating, but we are already seeing some, changes in the needs and the demands from the client side, particularly involved in the renewable sectors. And then particularly the biofuels and otherwise. So we'll see. I think we are more excited about, what to happen next, not just about this bill. Of course, the passage of the bill is, something to congratulate. 지금까지 들어주셔서 감사합니다. 다시 한번 정소영 교수님을 비롯해서 여러 주최
Once
호스트
again, I'd like to thank
기관들한테
the
감사
organizers of this
말씀드리고요.
forum, including Professor Chung Suh-Yong. And my presentation was quite short, but if I have an opportunity next time, I can deliver more detailed message. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your presentation.
So from the Florida University, the director Ted Curry of Energy City of Public Utility Research Center will make a speech and presentation. He's going to join us via Zoom. And
Studies of Public Utility Research Center from University of Florida.
Thank you very much. I'm going to mute my speaker and hopefully mitigate some of the impact feedback that Allison experienced. I'm going to share my screen with my presentation. So hopefully folks can see my presentation. My speaker's off, so if I can get a thumbs up. Thank you, Professor. That's great. So I'd like to start by thanking Professor Chung and the organizers of the forum for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I'm going to be looking at a couple of interesting provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act, but I want to caution you that when an economist uses the word interesting provision, it's not always a good thing. So I've specifically chosen three elements of the Inflation Reduction Act. First, for the incentives. So when an economist sees incentives, you're immediately thinking, what types of behavior is this going to influence? But the second thing that economists think about when it comes to incentives are unintended consequences. What are some of the behaviors that may not have been intended, by the policy owners or the policy makers, but that behavior is also incentivized through whatever mechanism. So I'll be looking at those three things, and we'll be focusing on what types of behavior is it likely to incentivize, and then what might be some of the unintended consequences. And those are interesting as well. I realize that a lot of you may not be familiar with the Public Utility Research Center at the University of Florida. So just to give you a little bit of background on the center itself, we are primarily engaged in executive education. We work with utility regulators and utility operators around the world, but primarily Latin America and the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa and the Middle East, South Asia, and East Asia and the Pacific. We've had about a dozen participants from the Korea Power Exchange at our programs, and terrific folks add a lot to the discussion. We also engage in research and other outreach efforts, but we're primarily working with utility regulators and utility operators. So before the Inflation Reduction Act passed in August, I want to take a look at three areas where I expect to see some significant changes over the next couple of years. But as I said, we're going to see some incentive. We're also going to see some unintended consequences. So I'm going to start with the clean vehicles, electric vehicles currently, but as we're going to see, the Act defines clean vehicles as more than just electricity power. Electricity is probably the biggest influence in the near term, but there are potential additional technologies that can take advantage of this credit going forward. Also going to look at the Act as it relates to carbon capture and storage technologies. And then finally, I'm going to look at hydrogen production and hydrogen storage. So let's start with the clean vehicle credit. This is basically an amendment of what was formerly known as the Qualified Plug-in Electric Drive Motor Vehicle Credit. So it only applied to electric vehicles. Now that's been broadened. Now it's clean vehicles. From a practical standpoint, it's still primarily concerned with electric vehicles, but hydrogen vehicles are eligible for the credit. We don't have widespread production of hydrogen vehicles for passenger cars in the United States yet, but that may be something that we look forward going in the future. The mechanics of the credit are relatively simple. It's a $7,500 tax credit on new electric vehicles and up to $4,000 on used electric vehicles, but there are a number of restrictions and conditions that we're going to talk about, and that could very well impact how this program is implemented going forward. And these restrictions are basically based on price and source, but we'll see how that's changing some of the mechanics. So first, the EV credit is realized through a tax credit. That's important. It's not a direct rebate at the time of sale. We're asking consumers to buy an electric vehicle, and then 9 to 12 to 18 months in the future, they receive a credit on their income taxes. So that difference is going to cause some potential complications. There is an income cap on who can receive the credit. So it's $150,000 for individuals, $225,000 for single head households. And I realize outside the United States, those numbers might lack context. So just to give you an idea, that $225,000, that's roughly the 92nd percentile for household income in the United States. So most households, over 90% of the households are going to be able to take advantage of this credit. There are lower restrictions for the used EV credit. The restrictions are basically half of the restrictions for the new EV credit. So the used EV credit is going to be less available, but you're still going to see more than half of the households able to take advantage of it. The new EVs have to be priced at $55,000 or less for a sedan model and $80,000 or less for SUVs and vans. Used EVs have to be priced below $25,000, and the credit is actually 30% of whatever the sales price is, up to $4,000. So basically, as long as the used EV costs more than $13,000 and change, you're going to get the full credit for your used EV. The problem is, you find a used EV for under $25,000, it's probably a 4 or 5-year-old car, which means it's getting near the end of its battery life. And battery replacement in an electric vehicle is really expensive. So I'm actually pretty skeptical about the used EV credit, because that $4,000, you're probably going to eat most of it, if not all of it, up in replacing the battery in the EV. So you look at cars, new EVs with a lower price point. So let's say the Nissan Leaf or the Hyundai Kona, as long as the Kona has roughly the same price point once they start manufacturing it in the United States. Those are going to be cost competitive with this used car, or with the used credit, and you get a new car. So I don't know that, the purpose of the used EV credit is to spur a secondary market for electric vehicles. I don't know. We'll have to see how that works out. I think unless battery replacement gets a lot cheaper, that credit makes a new car, at least a new car, let's say the Leaf or the Kona price point, is going to be a lot more attractive, because you can take the full credit and get a new car. There's also a manufacturer's cap that we have to deal with. Several popular electric vehicles in the United States have already reached their cap, which means you can't claim the credit if you buy them. So for the Chevy Bolt or the GMC Hummer models or the Ford Tesla models, those manufacturers have already reached their cap. So purchasers of those cars, if they qualify for the credit, they might be tempted to wait until 2023, not buy the car right now. Wait until 2023 and see what happens to the manufacturer caps. The Act does state that the caps in 2023 will be revised. So now those automobiles will qualify for the credit. The implementation, though, we haven't seen what that means yet. So the Act says revise the caps. We won't know what that means for a little while yet. So keep an eye on that to see how restrictive those new caps are, what the impact would be on sales for these models that are already at the cap. There are also, as been mentioned, materials restrictions. So the minerals in the batteries have to be sourced in North America or other countries with a U.S. free trade agreement, which includes South Korea. That restriction is 40% in 2023. It scales up to 80% in 2026. The battery components have to be manufactured in North America, and that starts at 50% in 2023, scales up to 100% by 2028. We've already seen reactions from Hyundai, from Kia, looking at, for Hyundai, moving up their North American plant, potentially bringing it online a year sooner than was planned. And there's also been talk of Kia building some of their electric vehicles here in North America. So we've already seen some changes in behavior from these materials restrictions. But what this means on the consumer end is that consumers may not know necessarily where their vehicle is built. The only way for consumers to find out if their automobile qualifies for the credit is they go to this webpage, and I included the link here. They go to this box and they put in the vehicle identification number for the car that they're thinking about into the box, and that will tell them if their car can qualify for the credit or not. That's a bit of legwork for the consumer. Now, for $7,500, it's worth it. But is every consumer going to do that? I don't think so. So the potential problem here is we're going to have a lot of consumers purchasing cars. We could have a lot of consumers purchasing cars only to find out 9 months later, 12 months later, that they're not getting the tax credit. And that can spur some frustration with the system. So we've got new opportunities for EV manufacturers, but we've got conditions, and that will constrain manufacturers in some ways. Again, new opportunities for consumers, but conditions, and that may end up constraining consumers in some ways. So it'll be very interesting to see how the clean vehicle credit turns out. But as I said, I suspect we're going to be seeing some news in about a year with customers who thought they were going to get the credit, and it turns out that they don't. So let's look at carbon capture and storage, another interesting initiative from the Act. Basically, all it does is update existing credits that carbon capture and storage technologies already have, and it adds a new category. It also extends the window for building these new projects. It also lowers the threshold for participation. So where in the past, you only had very large CO2 emitters that were eligible for the credit if they could abate some of that CO2, we're now going to see a lot more participants that are eligible. So that's going to be interesting to watch if that expansion helps matters. It also allows for the tax credit to be sold to a third party for cash. Now, this might make a project more attractive to investors, but it also may shift the risk for non-performance. You know, if you're putting up cash and you're getting a tax credit for the next 12 years, you know, and you don't control the project, you know, you don't have operational control over the project, then the question still remains, if the project stops abating CO2 or it doesn't extract CO2 with like a direct air capture, who's responsible? Does the company have to give back some of the cash payment? Do you lose because you bought the stream of tax credits that no longer apply? We don't know. We haven't set those rules up yet. So it's going to create a situation where folks that enter into these transactions are going to have to be very, very careful about rights and responsibilities. So basically, the credit's available for technologies that not only capture CO2 from existing industrial processes, so that's primarily electricity production or industrial production, and then either store them in salt caverns or utilize the CO2, you know, much in the way that coal plants will take some of the coal ash and sell it to cement companies. And cement companies use it as a binder. So you're basically taking the byproduct and you're using it in another process. It'll be the same way with CO2. But credit is also available for technologies that directly capture the CO2 from the air. So what we call direct air capture. Basically, the amounts of the credits have simply increased. So credits have increased from $50 to $85 a ton for storage, and from $35 to $60 a ton for utilization. For direct air capture, we've gone from $50 to $180 a ton and $50 to $130 a ton for utilization. So that's where you don't have an industrial process, you're directly capturing the CO2 from the air. So I think this is going to spur smaller projects, because now you have much smaller, pilot programs will be eligible for the credit. It's not just going to be the big emitters. The ability to transfer the credit to third parties is an interesting idea. I can see where it would make a project more attractive for investors, but boy, everybody's got to have a clear idea of what their rights and responsibilities are in the process, because I could see some potential for abuse. Once you've sold the credit to somebody else, you may not have an incentive to keep your machinery running because you've already been paid. And what does that do to the risk for a third party? And then finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about the incentives for clean hydrogen. This is a straight up production tax credit, and it's going to be scaled basically with the amount of carbon emissions you're capturing in your hydrogen production process. It also has some conditions on workforce development and wages, and we'll talk about those in just a second. It also classifies hydrogen storage as an energy storage technology that is now eligible for existing US government investment tax credits. The important thing to remember, though, is that this cannot be combined with carbon capture and storage. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. So basically, you've got a sliding scale for the production tax credit. Currently, the most mature technology for hydrogen production, called gray hydrogen, is steam methane reforming. And where basically you're taking methane and you're decomposing it into hydrogen and carbon monoxide. So if your CCS technology captures roughly half of the equivalent carbon as SMR technology would, you get a 60 cent per kilogram production credit. If your production has no emissions, so let's say electrolysis of water into hydrogen and oxygen, then you get a $3 per kilogram production tax credit for your hydrogen. So for hydrogen with no emissions. The reason I thought it was important that this doesn't stack with the CCS is that if you're producing hydrogen with steam methane reforming and capturing all of the carbon, you can't take the double credit. You can't take $3 a kilogram for production and the CCS credit because you're storing carbon. It's one or the other. And so folks are going to have to decide, do I want the, if I'm making hydrogen, do I want the credit for hydrogen production or CCS? You can't take them both. And there are some wage conditions basically based on the prevailing wage. So you have to pay a fair wage, and for workforce development, you have to utilize a certain number of apprentices. The thing is, the US pretty much lacks production. I mean, this incentivizes production and storage, but because we don't have a developed pipeline system for hydrogen, I expect most of the projects are going to be local, at least in the near term. And because electricity is so integral to the production process, I don't see the hydrogen displacing electrification. I think, using hydrogen as a direct fuel is the most likely implementation of this project. I mean, for energy storage to basically turn it back into electricity, it may not make sense, except in the case where we are curtailing renewable generation. Just to give you an idea, the state of California in 2021 curtailed over 1 million megawatt hours from wind and solar generation. That is, they basically said, we can't use those 1 million megawatt hours of electricity. I could see an application where we're using those 1 million megawatt hours to produce hydrogen through electrolysis. And we get the production tax credit, and now that electricity doesn't become a lost opportunity. So that's, I think, the best application of hydrogen. So a number of provisions to promote emissions reductions in the new IRA. Allison gave you a great rundown of everything. Just talked a little bit about 3 of them. They're probably all going to require some sort of expansion of existing infrastructure, and we still got a lot of questions about various parties' rights and responsibilities, and we're going to have to resolve them. We're going to get a lot of frustrated people. So thank you all very much for your time and attention, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, Director Terry. Last panelist, we're going to have a panel discussion. And now I would like to introduce the panelists.
As a moderator, we will invite Professor Suh-Yong of Korea University, and we have panelists Dong-Woon, Director of Division of Climate Change Technology Cooperation, Dave Kim, a Governance Lead from Global Green Growth Institute, and Park Joo-hyun, Associate from Yulchon. And we are also having a panelist, Lee Kyung-hee, who are joining with us online from the Korea Legislation Research Institute. So we have listened to 3 presentations and we are behind the schedule a little bit, but we have listened to many perspectives in the opening session, and we also listened to people representing both countries. And we also have experts from relevant agencies and institutes. We also have expert from Korea Legislation Research Institute, so we can hear about many issues raised from different perspectives. And I also talked about the intention of this forum. As I mentioned in my presentation, I talked 2 things. The first one is institutional foundation, which can strengthen the both countries between Korea and the US. And another thing is what kind of areas can be the subject to cooperation between the 2 countries. And we listened to 3 presentations. The first presenter, Scott Snyder, talked about the Institutional Cooperation Foundation for the bilateral cooperation. When I delivered the concept note to the speakers, we proposed the agreement between the 2 countries, and he responded to the proposal, and he proposed a council institutionally to discuss the cooperation on various issues. So we talked about institutional foundation and foreign policy perspectives. That was the suggestion by Scott Snyder, and the associate Allison talked about many things about the Inflation Reduction Act. She gave us an overview of the act, which is very controversial in Korea. The US is not strengthening the regulation. When you think about the EU case, they are strengthening the regulation, but US is taking different approach. They provide incentives to promote various technologies and cooperation, and Inflation Reduction Act is not an exception. When you see the structure there, many comprehensive climate change issues are covered in the bill, and Dr. Ted Curry talked about what kind of technologies in the US can be provided with incentives to promote the technologies, and Dr. Ted Curry also talked about the issues that may be interested by Korea. So he explained many things about the technologies. So we have listened to the positions and the situation in the US. From the institutional perspective, we have 4 panelists, and among them, Dave Kim from GGGI will touch upon that issue. Even though he cannot deal with all the institutional issues, he will touch upon the issues related to institutional foundation. And Dr. Park Joo-hyun, one of the panel, will talk about the trade aspect, as she is a lawyer from Yulchon, a representative law firm in Korea. And the key topic of today's discussion might be technology. That's why I invited Director Chun Dok-woo as the first panel to talk to, because this center is in charge of climate change cooperation. It is the government-related organization which is in charge of climate change cooperation, policy support, and technology cooperation support. That's why we invited Chun Dok-woo, Director of the Division of Climate Change Technology Cooperation. And lastly, I invited Research Fellow Lee Kyung-hee because we need to talk about the legislations. When we look at the law, we don't have detailed systems and incentives. You might wonder what kind of detailed incentives are provided under the law. So the Dr. Lee Kyung-hee from the Korea Legislation Research Institute will provide you more information about the legislation on climate change. So we have invited 4 panelists, and even though we are behind the schedule, we will give 7 minutes to each speaker. And we are also having participants from the US. So if you stay up until our end of discussion session, you may ask the questions. And yes, it is late at night in the US, so you can leave earlier. So I will proceed the panel discussion session, and we will mainly focus on the technological cooperation. So I'd like to hand the microphone over to Director Chun Dok-woo. So thank you for your kind introduction about our center. And I'd like to talk about the carbon neutral technologies and alliance. And I'd like to also talk about the cooperation based on Paris Agreement that incorporate the third countries. It is hard to discuss detailed things because of the time constraint, so I like to focus on the broader themes. A few months ago, we talked about the ODA in the second Global Forum on Climate Change Law Institutions, and I learned a lot from that discussion. And many things have been passed down from those discussions in the second Global Forum. As shown in the previous presentations, the characteristics of the Korea-US alliance has been changed. So we focus traditionally on the security and defense, but with the growing influence of the Korea in the technology and the market, our alliance has been expanded to these areas. And our center is analyzing the technologies. The US is the top in terms of technology, and US is dominant in terms of climate finance. Yes, it is true, Korea has many advanced technologies, but climate technologies and green technologies require reform of the institutions, and commercialization and scale-up of technologies are required. And CCS technologies and batteries require a global supply chain. It has a very long global supply value chain. So Korea may not be enough to manage all the long global value chain related to the technologies. We need to manage and invest in the global value chain. And in terms of the global value chain, the European countries are one of the leaders, and the US is taking the lead. Even though Korea has many good and advanced technologies, cooperation with US is required to commercialize the technologies. Korea is one of the resource-poor countries. It means that Korea needs to import many resources from developing countries. In this regard, Korea can form an alliance on the investment and technology cooperation and policy cooperation, and this will provide an opportunity to developing countries to attract new investment and develop their own technologies. Let me take a specific example. The cooperation level has increased, and the cooperation with the developing countries has increased as well. So venture companies of Korea and other countries work together, and formed an investment agreement using the GCF fund. And GCF is utilized to finance the venture project in developing countries. From the GCF perspective, it is serving as a seed money for the project. And there was a call for increasing and expanding the GCF fund. Korea has a quite small scale in the GCF. And in terms of market analysis, Korea is not enough. It means that cooperation with other countries is required. When I look at the situation, it is required for advanced countries, including the US, to join the formation of the fund. And joint venture needs to be created for technology transfer. And we also provide support with the fund to make sure that those technologies can be commercialized in the local countries. So it could be a good partnership example. And another thing is that ESG is talk of the world, and many parts of the countries are promoting ESG. But ESG can be an opportunity as well as challenges for Korea and other developing countries. I'm working with developing countries, including Indonesia, plastic and other unsanitary landfill of waste, which produces methane, has become a challenge and issues. And to solve this problem, the advanced technologies, which is very expensive, is required. But those technologies are supported by the Korean government in Korea, but developing countries' government does not have enough money, so that they neglect the problem. So when we conduct the feasibility study, it was hard to finance the project, but recently there was a movement and development. Global companies are investing in the projects in developing countries, like turning the coal power plants into the renewable energy sources. And there are also movements in the cement industry. Epson and Korea's large conglomerates are also joining hands and moving to make a new market. And investment in technologies are being made. So this kind of development and situation could be a good opportunity for developing countries to attract new investment. Another example is the industrial complex. There are many industrial complexes in developing countries, and there are global companies in that industrial complex. They need to use the renewable energy sources to meet the target, but it may be hard for them to secure the portion of renewable energy generation. But in that case, it requires a lot of investment and more investment. So Korea, ODA projects, or the US can make an investment to support developing countries. It means that developing countries can attract more FDI, and Korean and US companies operating in developing countries can be benefit from those kind of FDI investment. So we are talking about the win-win growth, but I think at this point, Korea and the US, it can form a green alliance based on Paris Agreement. And movement in that direction is required, and this is the thought I have. But many previous speakers today talked about the architecture of that alliance and the need for the cooperation. So I think that is the way for us to move forward, and we can achieve many things and contribute to each other to the economic growth and achieving the targets. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Chung has elaborated on the technical cooperation between us and the developing country, and he mentioned that we need to focus on the technology and financing, and they should go together. And the possibility also was mentioned. And each technical field the experts in these technical fields, they do their own technology promotion, and they do believe that their technologies are the best. But there are various technology out there, so how you utilize them well, it depends on the policy and institutions, I think. So in that sense, the GTC should play an important role. So now, as we have a limited time, he did not mention about the bilateral cooperation part, but I believe the center is committed to the bilateral cooperation as well. So I think that institutionalization of the technology can go side by side. And of course, this will not be done by one entity or one country, as there are many entities and also the institutions out there. I hope you can collaborate well for the successful outcome. Thank you very much. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Mr. Dave Kim, the governance lead at GGGI. Personally, he is a graduate of the International Relations at Korea University, and based on his learning in relation to the GGGI's governance issue, he's working very well, I think, and he's an expert in this field. And probably he will mention about the U.S.'s role of cooperation with Korea based on the GGI perspective. Thank you, Professor.
Participation, and it's my pleasure and honor to be here today. I think it's interesting how, so I will use English, I will speak English, and how GGGI, today's theme is Korea-US collaboration for climate change. And GGGI is not Korea and it is not US, it's a treaty-based intergovernmental organization. So I think it's fitting, and I think you're a genius, Professor Chung, because you sat me between, in the middle also, and I'm trying to balance the language by speaking in English. And as a Korean American, I think this is, I'm trying to bring the East and West together. So I briefly thought about how I would like to speak to you today, and I think how GGGI, to explain how GGGI can contribute to this very important collaboration between Korea and US for what is the challenge of our lifetime, climate change. I think I will do that by explaining a little bit about GGGI and try to give you 3 brief points. And the first is, I think, awareness. Whenever we have leaders, like more than 100 leaders at the Conference of Parties, COP meetings, or what will take place at Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27, but also when our President of Korea announces big initiatives. When he last year committed Korea to cutting 40% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 as part of the national plan. That, I think, it grabs attention. That raises awareness. And when we have, as Mr. William Cobb mentioned, when Moon and Biden have a summit at COP, whenever they have events, when they make these methane pledges, things like that, I think it really grabs attention, and that's key. But that's just public awareness. And I think when I think of awareness, there's another whole side to that, and that is the existing misconception among general people and also people in industries. So Korea is a very export-dependent economy. And naturally, people are always adverse to change. And when they think of green growth or sustainable development, they think, well, that means hindering or inhibiting our economic growth in some fashion. But that is not the case. The cost of renewable energy, for instance, is much cheaper now then of course there are variables and conditions, can be much cheaper than the standard fossil fuel-based energy. And when they realize that, then that type of thinking can be, I think, a game changer. I recall when, so my title is Head of Governance at GGGI. I also have another title, which is Special Advisor to our President and Chair of the Council, currently led by Mr. Ban Ki-moon. And I remember when Mr. Ban Ki-moon was leading the National Commission for Climate and Air Quality for 2 years under the President Moon's administration. He convened quite a few meetings among the ministers of Korea to persuade them, to help them see and enlighten them that this would be good for Korea. But you had MOTA, Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, and Kijebu, Ministry of Economy and Finance on one side, because they had that thought that this means hindering economic growth for Korea. Whereas you had MOFA, Foreign Affairs and Environment, on the other side. We have to do this. We're becoming the climate villain. But now you see how in the last 2 years, it's changed quite drastically, and the Korean industry, the private sector, as well as government, is adopting the idea of the early bird, right? The early bird gets to the worm. The quicker the Korean industry jumps into green technology, then that means we have a head start to export green technology. And I think Korea could be very, very innovative and very effective in that. Second is to introduce GGGI a little more. So GGGI is a treaty-based intergovernmental organization. It originally started as a Korean institution in 2010 during the Lee Myung-bak administration. In 2012, at the UN Conference for Sustainable Development, also known as Rio Plus 20, it became a treaty-based intergovernmental organization. Mr. Kim Sang-Hyup earlier mentioned that we have more member states than the EU. The EU has 27, the OECD has 38 the last time I counted. GGGI, as of this month, now has 44 member states. And we have 37 country offices throughout the world. And I think so what GGGI does, we have, the majority of those members are majority developing countries, but we have developed countries like Korea, the host country, Australia, Denmark, United Kingdom, Norway, and others being the developed countries. And what GGGI has been very instrumental in bringing these countries together, starting with the assessment. So if you have SIDSs, the small island development states, and then you have the big landlocked countries like Mongolia or Ethiopia, their needs are very different. So we go in and we assess in collaboration with our partner governments to be able to help them come up with the policies, national plans, find green finance or climate finance, and then at the end implement and help with the green jobs, improving livelihoods. It could be renewable energy, sustainable landscapes, water and sanitation, hygiene, waste, all of these other thematic areas. In 2021, just last year, GGGI helped mobilize $5 billion, that's billion with a B, in green bonds and other green investments for our member and partner countries. And what GGGI is trying to do is replicate these successes, these achievements in other countries and scale them up within our network of members and partner countries. And I think GGGI can play a role, especially again, with Korea and the US, because we both have these ODA funds and goals. In the interest of time, let me go ahead and go to the third and last point. Former Ambassador An Ho-young mentioned how challenges present opportunities, and this coincidentally is my third point. So as everybody knows, in the last 2.5 years, COVID was a huge challenge. Do you remember when we used to call it the novel coronavirus? It's not so novel anymore because it's been 2.5 years. When we came up with a vaccine, we rose to the challenge, and it presented an opportunity. Another thing about the COVID was trillions of dollars were mobilized in recovery and stimulus packages. GGGI quickly thought of how are these stimulus packages being spent? And we helped our member countries to make sure that these stimulus funds, these recovery packages, were green recovery, not business as usual. An example of that is the Green New Deal Fund that the Korean government is launching, or launched last year, is with the GGGI, for GGGI to manage, so that we can help with green recovery and accelerate the green transition with our member countries. Another more recent challenge might be the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think in the long term, it's not to belittle the suffering, but in the long term, it really was a good wake-up call for Germany and EU and other developed countries to see that we cannot continue with fossil fuel energy, but we have to come up with other alternative energy ideas, and that gave an impetus. Another example might be the carbon transaction platform, which GGGI is trying to launch and develop now. Mr. Ted Curry from University of Florida mentioned the carbon transactions and carbon pricing. GGGI is developing a platform where international carbon markets under Article 6 of the Paris Climate Agreement would be, GGGI would be a facilitator and the platform, the middleman, if you will. So that carbon finance from developed countries, as they buy carbon credits from developing countries, that would give developing countries the climate and carbon finance that they need so desperately for green projects within their countries. So in conclusion, the US, Korea, all of us, we have ODA funds. We have, these are the type of ways that GGGI, I believe, can be an instrumental tool, player, with the carbon transaction platform, and we are already doing so much with MOFA, Ministry of Economy and Finance, Environment, KOICA, USAID, and the Department of State, but we can scale up, we can replicate, and we can do that and help the green transition accelerated throughout the world. Thank you very much.
So he talked about the current status of the GGGI and why GGGI is required for the US-Korea cooperation. And officially, unofficially working with the GGGI. And as a Korean people, when we cooperate with GGGI, there are many mechanisms for GGGI. GGGI is an international organization and the largest donor country. And Korea can implement the mechanisms pursued and promoted by Korea, and if that kind of mechanisms can be an international asset, it would be a good situation for Korea. And there will be a mutual ground, and it will be a good situation as well.
Now, when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region, I think it is very important in terms of cross cooperation, and when it comes to the carbon pricing, he elaborates so well and explains so well from the perspective of Korea when it comes to carbon pricing. In order to achieve the goal of the NDC, well, it's really difficult for Korea to buy the credit, and while we reduce the GHG in the countries, and then with the ITMO that is created and between Korea and the United States or from other countries, we can use it for the benefit for all. So I think that that is the direction the Korean government will make will have interest, and so the international organization, Korea and the U.S., if our partnerships get stronger, then the global climate change response partnership can be created. And I would like to thank David Kim, the governance lead of GGI, for taking part out of his busy schedule.
And we also have invited the very important guest, Park Joo-hyun, associate from Yulchon, and I will give him a time for his remarks.
To the host, Mr. Kim, and Professor Chung for inviting me this precious and prestigious session. As a legal practitioner working frequently with people in industry, I'd like to represent and deliver their voices, mostly concerns on green economy regime. For the moment, people in industry is also accepting that regulatory measures in response to climate change are inevitable, and transition to clean energy based on decarbonization, such as natural gas or hydrogen, is a task which cannot be delayed any longer. And I think this is probably kind of a learning effect from serious damages caused by extreme climate fluctuations occurring all over the world. However, industrial people have doubts that these new legislations and policies may forget its ambitious goal of international cooperation to combat climate change. Moreover, recent legislation such as carbon border adjustment mechanism of European Union or ILA, Inflation Reduction Act of United States, appears to be a little bit incomplete. At this point, cooperation, those exporting to their product to other country have kind of concerns that this new regulation may have negative act on international transaction and trade. In other words, they are wary of these new systems which set higher environmental standard compared to the real world, acting as so-called non-tariff trade barrier, which restrict market access to other country for them. So, for instance, the United States emphasizes clean energy and decarbonization in Indo-Pacific economic framework, but according to the information released up to date, it is difficult to find or confirm the exact content and the level of environmental standard. In the same context, the IRA is also be able to be implemented in earnest when its sub-ordinances and directives are fully embodied. So it is a kind of unclear for private sector to encounter these new green regulations and policies. In this respect, I think it is time to recheck or readjust that this new carbon or methane reduction plan is realistic. And at the same time, this does not mean to abolish all the discussions so far, but rather to present the private companies for setting and adapting the new green economy regime. In this regard, cooperation between Republic of Korea and United States regarding climate change countermeasures shall be based on understanding the financial capacity of private and public, and the technologies possessed by company of each state. And I believe this work will align the ultimate goal of new regulations and also win support of traditional allies of Republic of Korea and US. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Kye-Hong from KLRI. Before participating in this discussion, I would like to, at the outset, give my gratitude to inviting me, and also I'd like to thank and pay my tribute and respect to all the panelists today. I have 2 points to make a comment to you, and within these 2 points, from the perspective of a legal person and those who are studying law, I want to say that the legal issues in the cooperation between the U.S. and Korea on climate change, whether the RIA can be some of the issues that the 2 countries must address. For example, in order to respond to the climate change, while setting up the law for the climate change response, there are some changes, and these changes entailed some challenges and areas for the cooperation for 2 countries. So I have the 2 issues and the legal framework change for the sustainable implementation. We need to have a legalization, and also the scope and area of the implementation of the legal embraces many areas. These can be one of the unique characteristics because in the existing past, because the law divided or classified into different categories. So one law did not embrace for or cover all. So when it comes to IIJ and green carbon neutrality law, when it comes to the purpose and jobs, they're embracing all relevant laws under this framework. And there's another common feature. And this is a question for 2 countries. First, environment and job creation. These can be coordinated? As other people mentioned, in order to achieve carbon neutrality, when we invest in industry or other technology, then it has a bright side, of course, but it can have some uneven area that will put disadvantages in terms of job creation and so on. So we have to correct that. For example, when it comes to the just transition, while during the labor movement in the history, and it was born out of this context, And this just a transition is from the U.S. perspective, and Korea has a perspective of a equal growth or just transition as well. And as I have just come up with that, and it has a plan, and based on this one, we have very important part. And also, still, how to deliver that is still in question. And when it comes to the Article 53 of the Green Carbon Law, we are preparing for the translation or transition. But when it comes to the detailed budget or plan, is in preparation. These two countries can cooperate in here. Second, in order to respond to a globally and to the climate change and to achieve the job growth, the two countries must cooperate and collaborate. And can they do really? And that is a question, because when it comes to the era and also the Basic Act on Carbon Neutrality of Korea aims to respond to climate change, but when it comes to Korea, it is focused more on job creation in the green sector and protect the climate vulnerable or marginalized classes. So clean system or investment in the zero emission cars can create additional effect in terms of the credit or a particular project. No matter what, these additional ripple effects can be created out of that and can impact to other additional sectors as well. As we are now, when it comes to the clean vehicles under the IRA, these are subject to the tax credit, and also it influences on EV. Already, there is a subsidy regulation on these kind of EVs under the BBB was included. So production facility and also charging stations will be supported, through which the jobs can be created. Of course, Korea carbon neutrality when it comes to Basic Act Article 5, and also in the Implementation Ordinance 48 indicates that is confined to the domestic situation. So that will aim the labor market of Korea in terms of creating jobs in green field in Korea and so on. And also, such a development can happen in the labor market as well. As we know, these kind of laws are the local laws, so they are required by their own countries. So global cooperation and agreement can be somewhat limited by these local and domestic laws. So I would like to suggest as the following. Of course, I'm not aiming to the economic things because I'm majored in social studies. For example, when it comes to the IRA, of course, we do have aim to provide or make a provision of the clean cars. But if we allow more options to the households, then we can reduce the cost burden of the household, which will be befitting to the law. And also we can get a hint from the IRI as well. So basically, as a common legal purpose between the countries, we can support both a carbon neutrality and also support the economies of the livelihoods of people. So I think that we can have a mutual cooperation in this field. So after all, the services and facilities that are needed can be jointly produced, and also cooperation can be effectively made as well. The law to respond to climate change is changing and has a shared goal and challenges. So there are some identical solutions such as just a transition, but when it comes to the implementation, there's some discrepancies. So some part needs some coordination, but with the existing things, laws cannot coordinate well. So the goal of carbon neutrality and also creation of a job should be considered at the core to come up with a cooperative plan for the legal framework. And that is my idea. The income level and also economic impact from the perspective that was mentioned by the Professor Ted Curry could be one of the food for thought for us. And also, Ms. Allison mentioned about the tax, and I believe that the two countries could have room for the further negotiations. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Yi. She is has interested in social insurance law, so probably you have heard the just transition of the U.S. and also just a transition of Korea. There are some different policies and laws, respectively. So she mentioned about whether there will be some of the room for the cooperation between the two countries, and she proposed some good ideas. With that, we have heard the discussions with the four panelists this year, and we are 5 minutes behind the current original schedule. And I believe that the United States audiences are in the time difference zone, so they were staying up late, so they has just went back to their places. So they said that they're going to send some of the answers if there's any, and later on. And when it comes to the climate change cooperation, well, apart from that, the two countries' cooperations are being very time-honored areas, and there are many areas for the cooperation between the two. Although the two countries' cooperations on the climate change was somewhat not a top priority for the two countries, but while having discussions with the EU countries, the agenda has become the top priority, and also from the perspective of a comprehensive alliance between the two countries is the trend, and that the Korean government is pursuing. So it's centering on that. We should scale up the cooperation on the climate change. Will be very important. And I think when it comes to the details and concrete implementations, there are a lot there. So along with the legal framework and institutionalized systems should be also prepared. So we need to discuss further on that going forward. And panelists also mentioned about that as well. And what is particular is that Mr. David Kim mentioned about cooperation between the GGI and Korea and the U.S. cooperation. And from my perspective, I believe that U.S. should accede to the organization or institute to have a further cooperation in that field. So I think we need to further discuss on that later on. Anyway, I would like to thank you all for stay with us till now, and also I would like to thank KLRI and other organizers for supporting a lot for this event. And now I would like to declare the end of the forum. If you have any closing announcement, please, Master of Ceremony will announce.
On climate change law and institutions, and I was Kim Suh-Yong, CCMG. Thank you very much.